Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation, Paolo, Piero, and others. It's fantastic to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I think I have 35 minutes, and I want to talk to you about Open Innovation 2.0, a new paradigm. So I'm not going to give you a glitzy corporate presentation. What I'd like to do is give you a drive-by shooting of the topic of innovation. I want to show you lots of pictures, share lots of concepts, and hopefully after my talk you can then synthesize them into something that's actually useful for you. This is a quote that Piero and I use quite a bit. It talks about actually when the winds of change blow, you can either build a wall to keep the wind out or you can build a windmill. I think the choice individually and collectively that we have to make is, are we going to build a wall? Are we going to build a windmill? So innovation itself is actually changing faster than a speeding bullet. We know society is changing, but the practice of innovation is changing. So I don't have all the answers, neither does Piero. But what I want to present you today is some snapshots. We've been watching this bullet travel. In fact, we're part of the bullet. And I want to show you some images as we do sort of some flash photography. What are we observing? So we know one thing that hasn't changed actually from the time of Machiavelli. Innovation is still very risky. Lots of people actually, the people that want to preserve the status quo will actually want to stop you as an innovator. So this hasn't changed, but many other things have changed. I wanted to give you a couple of perspectives. This week in Dublin, we held a Future Internet Assembly, and a gentleman called Misha Doler, he was asked, well, what's his perspective on entrepreneurship? And he said, well, let me tell you what I tell my employees on Monday morning. Every Monday morning, he says this to employees. He says, life is not about money. It's about a lot of money. So that's how he motivates his employees. But let me give you a different perspective. Peter Drucker, one of the biggest business gurus of the last decade or century, well, he said that business is the instrument of social justice. So you have two extremes here, lots of money and it's about social change. Well, really the answer is somewhere in between. And Michael Porter, we're in a business school, so he's very well, I'm sure, respected here. He's been talking about shared value, the idea that we could reconceive the intersection between corporate performance and society, and that we can create win-win outcomes. And this is shared value. And shared value is very often done in the environment or context of a shared vision, and I'll come back to that later on. In fact, the organization that I'm responsible for leading, we actually practice the principles of shared value. So my goal and Intel's goal is that we'll be successful in Europe if we make Europe successful. So we've aligned our research outputs towards the Europe 2020 plan. Now there's lots of Eurosceptics around, but we certainly believe if we can help Europe be successful, we'll be successful. We have our CEOs just retiring, Paul Otellini, big Italian heritage name, and he was in Dublin a few weeks ago and he talked about some of his biggest lessons, and I just want to share two of them with you. The first one is the most important. He said, Intel wins when our customers win. So making sure your customers win is a great starting point. And the second thing he said was bet big. Intel bets big. And we'll come back to betting big in a second. We know that innovation is moving out of the lab. In the past, there was a brilliant scientist at Bell Labs or an IBM lab that came up with the innovation. Well, we now know that innovation is a team sport. One inspirational person, 99 other people to help bring it to reality. Henry Chesbrough wrote about open innovation in 2003. The idea that not all of the bright people in the world work for my company, so I can source my ideas externally. And Procter & Gamble are a very good example of this. They're the poster child for open innovation. A.G. Lafley, when their share price halved overnight, he said, we need to do something different. He came up with a strategy called Connect and Develop. And today, about 50% of Procter & Gamble's new product ideas actually originate outside the company. But in fact, we've long left that behind. Today it's about the innovation network and ecosystems. And I can't think of a better example of competition is in mobile phones. So it's Apple versus Android versus Nokia and Microsoft. So it's no longer my company, but am I part of a winning ecosystem? So as an entrepreneur, I have to figure out, can I join an ecosystem that has good prospects, or can I create my own ecosystem? And we practice what we preach in Intel Labs. We have a network, we've built a network of 45 labs over the last 3 years, and we've been practicing these principles of Open Innovation 2.0, and we've quadrupled in size. We've gone from about 800 people, R&D professionals, to 4,500. Now you might notice we don't yet have a lab in Italy, but that might be an opportunity for collaboration. But of course, we do collaborate in Italy. You know, we're working with Fiat, we work with Telecom Italia, we work with Cinica. But success in the future is about ecosystem. In fact, it's about the network, and it's about network effects. The real winners are the organizations that can position themselves in a very effective network and can achieve network effects. So how innovative is Italy? On the face of it, gosh, there's some great Ferrari, Lamborghini, AC Milan, Juventus, Italian fashion. All around the world, Italy is known for, you know, design. But let's stop and think about the European Innovation Scorecard. I was privileged to be part of the high-level group that worked on the European Innovation Scorecard. And in the past, innovation performance in Europe was only measured by how much we spend on innovation, and there was a European target, let's spend 3% of GDP on innovation. But probably the worst measure of innovation performance is how much you spend on R&D, because it really tells you nothing. So unfortunately, despite all the iconic information and, you know, images and brands in Italy, Italy is not classified. It's not classified as a leading innovator or an innovation follower. It's classified as a moderate innovator. Now, I was just in a work group, and there was some really bright people came up with a really bright solution, you know, within 45 minutes. So what can be done about this? Well, I'd encourage you to look at the European Innovation Scorecard and where is Italy strong and where it's weak. There's a beautiful diagnostic tool. But I said that how much you spend on R&D is a bad measure of success. But I think the biggest issue, actually, when you look at Italy, is actually how much you spend on R&D. Compared to the European average, government R&D and private R&D and availability of venture capital is amongst the lowest in Europe. So I actually think, even though it's a very simplistic problem or solution, one of the things that needs to happen in Italy is you need to spend more on R&D. So what's innovation? Well, this is Michael Schreis from MIT, my absolute favorite statement on innovation. He says, innovation is not innovators innovating, it's customers adopting. So unless you can say, here's the customer, what are they adopting, and is there value? It's not innovation. So when we think about what the banks called financial innovation, it was value destruction, not value creation. So we really couldn't call it innovation. Probably one of the most important terms, and this is something Piero and I have been writing about for the last number of years, is the idea of high expectation entrepreneurs. And high expectation entrepreneurs are very important. You know, jobs is the #1 political issue in Europe. And the definition of a high expectation entrepreneur is very simple. It's somebody who has the ambition to employ more than 20 people within 5 years. Now, for those of you that are SMEs and have run businesses, that's actually quite challenging. There's lots of, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 people companies. But to get to 20 people in 5 years is a challenge. But this can happen when we get high ambition and we have a disruptive technology. Or it doesn't have to be a disruptive technology. It could be a disruptive business model. One of the companies I most admire, they also have their faults, though, is Ryanair. Ryanair has completely disrupted the airline industry in Europe. It started with 1 plane, with 2 planes. Now it has a bigger market capitalization than British Airways and Lufthansa combined. And it's completely changed the face of Europe. And there was high ambition, and they just copied a disruptive business model from Southwest Airlines. Now, I wish they'd smile a bit more, but apart from that, it's been very successful. So high expectation entrepreneurs create 80% of all jobs. So if you can combine high ambition with disruptive technology, that you're onto a winner. Of course, that's a bit superficial because it does need a lot of hard work. it needs perseverance, it needs experimentation, it needs innovation, it needs vision. And you might have heard the expression, overnight success takes on average a decade, and that's probably true. So one of the companies in Europe that's been most successful in the last couple of years is Rovio, based in Espoo in Finland. You know, with their Angry Birds, you know, it's the most downloaded app in the world. But what's not known is that they probably developed dozens and dozens and dozens of applications which weren't successful until they hit on Angry Birds, and then it's wildly successful, most downloaded app in the world. But they were established in 2003, and it took quite a while for them actually to become the overnight sensation that they are. So I mentioned in my earlier talk, don't fall in love with the technology. So I have to ask the question, is great technology enough? Now, does anybody know what picture this is? Or, well, I'll keep you out of your, I'll keep you out of your misery. It's actually a picture of the old Polaroid factory in Stockholm, just outside Stockholm. So Polaroid and Kodak, they both invented the digital camera. So why aren't they around today? Well, it wasn't lack of ideas and technology that killed these companies. Inertia did. And just to pardon the pun, shift happens. There's a lot of shift happening. That's a pun on another English word, which I'm not going to mention. But you have a choice to make. Either you're going to be the disruptor, or you'll be disrupted. And Intel, we face a choice as a company. We have to continue to be disruptive, or else somebody's going to come in and eat our cake. So Kodak are gone. Shutterfly is a new startup that was very successful. But Fujifilm, they were in exactly the same position as Kodak and Polaroid. In fact, they were a follower. How come they were able to reinvent themselves? And you know, they're still prospering and thriving. And in fact, even though Fujifilm is a Japanese company, the innovations that actually saved Fujifilm and turned it into a force actually were led from their German office. So I mentioned these megatrends earlier: mass collaboration, digital transformations, and sustainability. And they're creating this opportunity for a paradigm shift in innovation. So if we can use the analogy, you know, I guess 600 million years ago, it was pre-Cambrian, we had these single-cell organisms. And then came these multi-cell organisms. And all of a sudden, we had this Cambrian explosion of new life forms. We're about to experience this in terms of innovation, because we're seeing that industries that existed for nearly a century, unchanged, have been transformed almost overnight. And we're about to see many other ones be transformed. And there's an opportunity for each of us actually to lead these transformations. Now, we can't do them on our own, but we can do them as part of a network. So coming back to the definition of innovation, you know, at Intel we look for, is something new, is there value, and who's adopting it? So an innovation could be a new product, it could be a new service, it could be a new behavior, it could be a new method, it could be a new process, it could be a new brand. And the organization, it could be an individual, it could be a corporation, or it could be a new society, or it could be society. But to think about sustainable innovation, we also have to think about making it a win-win proposition, coming back to shared value. So there has to be value for the customer, and there has to be value for the supply chain that's delivering the innovation. Otherwise, you get a bubble, and you get short-term gain, and then everything collapses. So Chespo wrote about open innovation, the idea that I can find ideas externally and use them internally. People increasingly have been thinking about triple helix innovation. Henry Ektovitz he's a professor at Stanford, has been writing about this. The idea that governments, industry, and academia collaborate together to create value. Well, the thinking has moved on, and today we talk about quadruple helix innovation. So this is where government, industry, academia, and citizens work together to drive structural changes far beyond the scope of what any one organization can do. An example of Dublin I mentioned earlier on, where the citizens are working with the city and with Intel and with Trinity College to figure out, well, what are the usage models? Now, this is a very important chart because I want to tell an Intel case study. Intel, by any measure, is one of the most inventive companies on the planet. So year on year, we're in the top number of patent generators. But if I ask you the question between 1996 and 2006, and in this period, Intel was profitable every quarter. Every quarter, we were generating more than $1 billion of free cash from operations, which is quite outstanding. But in that 10-year period, which grew faster, inflation or Intel? Would anyone know what the answer is? So Intel, top 10 patent generator, new products. Every year, we're turning over our portfolio. 90% of the products that we're shipping didn't exist 2 years before. Generating $1 billion of free cash each quarter, always profitable. Well, inflation grew faster than Intel over 10 years. So we had this problem. Each year we're $36 billion of revenue, but we couldn't grow. So Larry Keeley from Dublin, he's a leading innovation consultant in the US, he spoke to us and he shared some research, and he calls this the 10 types of innovation. And he's looked at many industries. Where are the innovation efforts focused on? And what he found is that most of the innovation efforts, are focused on product performance. And we talked to BMW and Daimler, it's all about faster, cheaper, better. But then he looked at where are the innovation returns coming from. And this was quite an important insight for us. In fact, the area of lowest innovation return was coming from improving product performance. The big areas were actually in business model innovation, in ecosystem innovation, in changing the customer experience, and in brand innovation, in building your product system. And companies like Dell and Apple and so on, this is where they've been successful. So again, to my message this morning, don't fall in love with the technology, fall in love with the business model. The end of this story was actually, now this wasn't singularly responsible for the business result that we got. Our CEO made lots of changes, but some changes happened in the company, and we took a small amount of our supply side R&D money and we put it into demand side innovation. So we started to work with our customers to create new usage models, new solutions that created demand for Intel products. And the net result was between 2009 and 2011, Intel grew by 50%. So our revenues went from 35 billion to 55 billion. And a piece of actually achieving that kind of business result was actually changing the mindset and thinking about the business model innovation, our ecosystem innovation, brand innovation, user experience innovation, and so on. An important tool as an entrepreneur thinking about building a new business is the business model canvas. And maybe, I'm not sure if this is already taught in the school here, Alexander Osterwalder pioneered this. But I know Nespresso they have great coffee machines here in Italy, but Nespresso have been using this tool and George Clooney to mount this incredible assault on the Italian coffee equipment and Italian coffee itself. So I'd encourage you to use this tool. And I'm going to mention at the end, on Monday the 20th and 21st, we have a major conference in Dublin focused on Open Innovation 2.0, and Alexander Osterwalder is one of our speakers, and he'll be talking about the business model canvas. Clay Christensen introduced the idea of disruptive innovation almost a decade ago, professor from Harvard, and he talked about how a technology that initially is inferior and cheaper than an incumbent technology replaces that technology or product ultimately. And one of the great examples is the PC replacing the mainframe. And that's a very important kind of innovation. But equally important, and Henderson and Clark wrote a seminal paper on this about a decade ago, is the idea of architectural innovation. So architectural innovation is the idea that we can take existing components and put them together in a different way to deliver an innovation that's unstoppable. And arguably, Apple have done this with the music industry. So at Intel, we had an MP3 player on the market 2 years before Apple had. In fact, we shut down our MP3 player factory 2 weeks before Apple launched the iPod. But Apple had a broader vision. In fact, they had their courage of convictions, because Intel had the same idea. Why don't we, basically digitalize the music industry? But we didn't have the courage or the confidence, or the CEO made the decision that well, this isn't our core business. But Apple were able to make that decision. So again, the point I'd like to make is that we need incremental innovation, we need modular innovation, we need disruptive innovation, but probably the hardest kind of innovation to defend against is architectural innovation. And it's one of the easier things to do is take existing components, put them together in a different way. We also need to think about the innovation value chain, and Burton Shaw and others have written about this. We have idea generation, we have idea implementation, and we have idea adoption. Now, most of the research and most of the press and most of the funding, in fact, is in the idea generation area. Now, depending on where you come from, this might be seen as hard or it might be easy, but idea implementation is harder. But the hardest of all is actually idea adoption. I just had the honor of presenting last week at the European Competitiveness Council as part of the Irish presidency, and the Commissioner for Research was there and all the innovation ministers, and we were talking about this. And most of the European funding, see in FP7 and national funding, is in this area. But this is where the hard work is. So one of the hopes and one of the things that Horizon 2020 will do is actually shift some of the funding so we get this from research to retail approach. So European innovators will actually be better supported than they are today than in the past. And one of the commitments of the Commissioner is also for SMEs to actually make it much more simple for SMEs to participate, because in the past it was very difficult and there was lots of issues with cash flows when you did the work and when you got the funding. What's really important as well is that we look for synergies and we're able to exploit exponential technologies. The businesses that are winning are the businesses that achieve network effects, Google, Facebook, and so on. If we look at last century, many of the innovations came from flow of electrons. Electrification enabled a huge amount of wealth creation, both business value and social, societal value. This century, it's about knowledge-driven entrepreneurship, and Piero and I have been talking and writing about this for a number of years. But it's all about knowledge flows. Commissioner Geoghegan-Quinn talks about knowledge as the crude oil of the 21st century. And I think, Google and Facebook are examples where you can create enormous wealth in very short spaces of time by thinking about the knowledge flows. The European Internet Foundation is an organization, European MEPs. They did a very nice report. I'd encourage you to read it. It's called actually Europe, a Digital World in 2025. But what they found is they looked at all the trends. They said the central paradigm they see is one of mass collaboration. And we're getting the social media, the connectivity that will enable this. I think Facebook and YouTube, they're very cosmetic examples of what's going to be possible. But in the future, we're going to see an awful lot more mass collaboration, machine to machine, people to people, people to machine. We also see the user is becoming much more involved, and it's moved from where the user was a research object to where the user became a contributor, and now actually the user is a co-creator of the innovation products. And we see everybody is participating in the innovation process, and we see this much richer, much deeper networking happening across, not just in the industry value chain, but across all of society. And we see a fundamental shift happening for the business model. So this is the way innovation used to happen. Innovation was essentially something that was done to a user or done to a customer. But I'm chairing an EU group called the Open Innovation Strategy Policy Group, and a year and a half ago we did an extensive research project talking about the socioeconomic impacts of open service innovation, and this was one of the key outcomes, is that there's a new innovation pyramid happening. It's a reverse innovation pyramid, where actually users are actually not only sort of co-participating or co-contributing to the innovation process, but are also contributing to it. And of course, the best example that I can think of on this is the App Store. Phenomenal, approaching 50 billion app downloads, and it's absolutely phenomenal. But it's not just Apple. Here's another simple example. Actually, just to mention that, very interesting around this is absolutely showing these exponential tendencies, both in terms of number of downloads and the number of applications that are written. I mentioned about you either have to join a network or join an ecosystem, or maybe you could even co-create one. Venkat Ramaswamy is a significant professor in Michigan, and he's been writing with C.K. Prahalad, who wrote about core competencies, but he's been talking about innovation platforms, engagement platforms, and he defines these as assemblages of persons, of artifacts, of processes, of software that allow engagement to happen. And this is all about, co-creation of value. In fact, what's being established today, this experimental lab is a very good example of an engagement platform. One of the examples I really like is Lego Cuso. Has anybody heard of Lego Cuso? This is allowing children all around the world to actually come up with new suggestions for Lego, what to build. But it trains children to be entrepreneurs, because they have to get 10,000 supporters, 10,000 other children around the world to say, I like this and I might buy it. And once that happens, then there's a Lego Technology Review Board will review it, and very often they decide to manufacture it, and the children get a percentage of royalty from those product sales. So this is an example of the reverse innovation pyramid. The experience economy is something that, there was a lot of talk about it around 2002, 2003, and James Cash and others wrote about it. But I think it's still very valid, and I wanted to just discuss that briefly. Let's go back to coffee, since it's something that's close to home. Well, the farmer, he gets a small amount of money for his product. Then we have somebody like a Nescafe or whoever, they get more money. In the US, maybe it's, Dunkin' Donuts, they sell sort of coffee as a service, but of course Starbucks sell it as an experience. Here's where the money is. So the more actually you can move up the stack here and aren't really a commodity player, but are delivering the experience, that's where I would encourage you to think about innovating. Now, of course, there's a phase beyond this, which is called sustainable intelligent living, but that's a whole other lecture. So I think what we're striving to do is create, and in a country like Italy and in Europe, is create this whole new innovation milieu, which we call Innovation 2.0, where we have these sort of, loosely connected value chain of companies. This could be an Intel, it could be a Fiat, and there are also SMEs. The universities are, putting their IP in here, government are supporting it, and we've got public domain IP. And I want to give you an example of how can you build a cluster from the ground up. So here in Bologna, machine packaging, it's something that evolved over many decades. But this is an experiment that Intel is involved with off the west coast of Ireland, and we're trying to build a new cluster that's about bringing the ocean and digital technologies together. And we have brought together, with the Marine Institute, we've brought together the quadruple helix with government, industry, academia, and small companies. And each of these dots actually is an organization or a person. And I want to give you an ecosystem chart. We started to design this in May 2009. We brought the players together. And let me see, Yvonne Shields is somewhere here. This lady was the strategic director of the Ireland's Marine Institute. Actually, this is me. But at the start, we had just a few people that were interested in this. But if we fast forward, this was where the network was actually within sort of, 14, 15 months. And what we saw is that through relatively simple transactions and some support and a vision, that we started to get this emergent platform. And within sort of 18 months of creating this cluster, we were able to invite Commissioner Damiaki, who's the Marine Commissioner, and Commissioner Gagan Quinn, who's the Research Commissioner, to Galway, which is the west coast of Ireland. And we were able to show them 8 new services, new usage models that didn't exist 18 months before, but now we're on a path to commercialization. So the point is here, it is possible to build new clusters from the ground up in a very short period of time. But there's one important lesson. Because Yvonne Shields was the driver of this cluster. She was the strategic director of the Marine Institute, and the Irish government made a decision to promote her. And if they took her out of the center of this ecosystem, and they made her the CEO of Irish Lighthouses. Now, Irish Lighthouses, they haven't changed in 100 years except for automation, and they're not going anywhere. But can you imagine what happened to the cluster when the most important person driving it was taking it out? It actually collapsed. And it's now taken another 12 months to actually find somebody else actually that can go drive it. So the cluster is still not where it was, you know, at this point, which was, I think, the midpoint of 2011. So I think there's important learning here. Don't promote the good people out of the cluster. Keep them in it and reward them. I want to give you a case study of another innovation cluster that was built, and your Professor Formica is a senior fellow at the Innovation Value Institute. And this is not a physically based cluster. This is a geographically distributed virtual cluster around the world. And this is a new institute that was started about 5.5 years ago. It had a vision of transforming the way companies and governments get value from information technology. It's from a small based in a small university that has only 6,000 or 7,000 students, so not the 80,000 students that the University of Bologna has. But in 60 seconds, this video will tell you the story of actually building that cluster. So it was a little bit loud, but I think you get the idea. So this is something that started from nothing and now is not yet a global phenomena, but many companies and governments around the world are adopting these methodologies. And I'll be happy to talk at lunch with people around, you know, what has made this work. So culture is hugely important, and so how do we define culture? Well, this is a nice definition from Wikipedia. Now it's the source. The totality of socially transmitted behavior, patterns, arts, beliefs, institutions, and all other products of human work and thought. So we've been talking about open innovation, but what's equally more important in the culture of a country is whether, or a company, is there an openness to innovation? And I remember years ago, Nicholas Negroponte, famous American-Italian or Italian-American, talking about what he did and trying to explain to his grandmother what he did. And he talked and talked and talked, and after about 15 minutes, his grandmother said to him, "Oh, I understand what you do. You're unemployed." He was trying to explain to her that he was an entrepreneur, but she couldn't get it. So we really need to think about culture as well. And at Intel, we've been thinking about actually and looking at innovations that have been successful. And we found there's at least 6 vectors that need to be in place for an innovation to be successful. Of course, you need to have a vision. You need to have a technology or a solution. You need a business model. But the hard stuff is when you're thinking about, well, what's the business process change? What's the organizational change required? And very often the hardest is the customer societal change. You know, what's the utility and the usability of the innovation that you're trying to bring to the market? So I want to finish by saying that, you know, ideas aren't enough. We talked about the innovation value chain. It's ideas by execution by adoption. But strategic innovation is where we can do that in the context of a vision. And vision is hugely important because if we don't have the vision, we might get a sporadic, you know, overnight success, but it's a one-hit wonder. So vision is hugely important. And, you know, there's some very good examples of a vision. Alexander Graham Bell, his vision of what the telephone might do. John F. Kennedy, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely. And there was so much alignment around this. I think everybody knows the story of the janitor working at NASA when he was asked what he does. Rather than cleaning the toilet, he said, "I'm working to put a man on the moon." So vision is hugely important. But it actually takes courage too. And this is my favorite moment of the last few years, Felix Baumgartner. First, there was the courage and the audacity of Red Bull Stratus to say, we're going to attempt this. But can you imagine, I certainly wouldn't do it. Can you imagine the courage it took to step out there? But there was a beautiful tweet just 10 minutes after this happened. I think it was from somebody in America. And he said, I just realized that a sports drink company has a better space program than my country. And in that moment, I think it defines actually how innovation is changing. So my last point, Open Innovation 2.0 is a conference we're running in Dublin, 20th and 21st of May. If you're interested in anything I said, I'd strongly encourage you. There's direct flights from Bologna to Dublin. We have some of the world's leading innovators. We have the CEO of McLaren, who supply all of the systems to Formula One. We have the Chief Scientific Officer of Rolls-Royce, the Chief Technology Officer of Intel, Justin Ratner, and many other leading speakers. What we've learned, and this is research from Engine Group, it was published in The Economist just a while ago, that one technology job in general will create 4.3 other jobs in the local environment. So there absolutely is data to say that high expectation entrepreneurs that use disruptive technology really make a difference in an economy. So Oscar Wilde was a famous Irish playwright, and he wrote about there are three kinds of people in the world. There's those that watch it happen, there's those that make it happen, and then there's the third is, what the hell happened? So I think each of us have a choice. We have to make a decision. So we can decide, well, we're not going to dare, and we'll let everybody else decide our future, or we can step forward and take responsibility. Steve Jobs used to say one more thing. We judge ourselves by our intention, but most other people judge us by what we do. So innovation is very easy to talk about. It's much harder to do, so we have to walk the talk. So I would encourage you, this is something that Sun Tzu said hundreds of years ago, opportunities multiply as they're seized. I think in the history of human society, there never have been more opportunities than are available today to people with ambition and with courage. So the motto of Intel Labs Europe is, we dream it, we dare to do it, and we do. So it's been fantastic to speak with you, and again, I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here in this beautiful city, and looking forward to seeing some great results today. So thanks again. Grazie.
Avete capito la storiella che ha raccontato di Negroponte? Allora la riassumo brevemente. Negroponte, la mamma gli domanda, sapete chi è Nicky Negroponte, l'inventore del Media Lab? La mamma gli domanda che cosa fa e lui ci mette 50 minuti a spiegare tutto quello che sta facendo. La mamma dice, ho capito, sei disoccupato. Questa è la storiella. Allora, nessuna domanda, non posso credere. Nessuna curiosità, curiosity driven, like a fox. Prego, Lucia, proprio.
Actually, connecting the Open Innovation Challenge to the opportunity of smart city systems that you have explained this morning, have you experienced cases where smart city systems act as enablers of social innovation, not just innovation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually, one of the things I didn't talk about today, which is another characteristic of Open Innovation 2.0, is social innovation. And very often, if you have shared value, that creates social innovation. One of the examples I came across recently, I don't think it's limited to smart city, but it's where you have better data. That's where you can drive social innovation. So an Intel researcher, he's been working as part of the EIT, the European Institute of Innovation and Technology Young Innovators Forum. And he's been working to try and actually smash two databases together. One is buying habits of people in supermarkets, and on the other hand, they're trying to put together the healthcare trends. And by actually putting these two pieces of data together into a big database to extract, actually, is a relationship between what people buy in supermarkets and what they buy, and their long-term health trends. And this is probably one of the biggest unexploited opportunities in the world. So I think it's not just generic to smart cities, but as more and more data becomes exposed, the opportunities there to create a lot of value. And there was a recent study, actually 2 interesting studies. CNBC talked about what was the most hated job in the world. Can anybody think about what the most hated job in the world was? Well, it was the Chief Information Technology Officer, or the IT Director. And that's research from about 3 or 4 years ago. But Harvard Business Review published a paper last year that talked about, well, what was the sexiest job of the 21st century? Does anybody know what it was? It's a data scientist. So data science and data scientists is going to be hugely important. So I think the more and more data we create, the more opportunity we get to create value. And in our projections, we project there'll be about 15 billion connected devices by 2050. And Ericsson actually say they think there'll be about 50 billion. But whatever the number is, there's going to be a lot more data. In fact, Google say, and I think they're quite accurate, 90% of the data that exists in the world today has been created in the last 2 years. So we're on this really exponential technology, but more and more there are these design patterns that actually are emerging. So you get this big data, and there's actually a methodology. Here's how you go from the big data to some actionable insight. So that's a long-winded answer, but hopefully it helped.
Okay, there's another. L'ho acceso? Just a second.
Ok. La faccio in italiano che mi viene più semplice. In una delle slide che ha mostrato, mi sembra... Ok. Non c'è un Intel Lab in Italia. Cioè in quasi tutta Europa, mi è sembrato, adesso non mi ricordo, e niente, volevo sapere se c'è l'intenzione... Non chiedo il perché non c'è in Italia, perché probabilmente... ma se c'è l'intenzione, insomma, di aprirlo anche in Italia.
The intention to do.
So rather than see this as a problem, it's an opportunity. I think there's a couple of opportunities. Maybe we do something with Cinica. The University of Bologna has done a really good job in actually taking an industrial approach to FP7 research, and in fact we do some collaboration with the University of Bologna. And there's also opportunity for Intel Capital as well to invest, in some prospective Italian startups. So I think this is an opportunity, and this is my 3rd visit now with Piero to Bologna. And each time I'm here, we start to unearth, well, actually here might be the right opportunity, for Intel to co-invest with some Italian entity to create a joint research effort. So I'm optimistic we can do something. I can't promise anything, but I'm optimistic. Thank you.
Hanno fatto la stessa domanda sul Corriere. Una cosa importante, I say what you said in English, in Italian, esiste Intel Venture Capital. Allora l'idea che loro hanno per i futuri laboratori è che se nascono, si promuovono start-up dal basso, può intervenire Intel Venture Capital che gestisce milioni e milioni di euro in seed, capitale di rischio, e intorno a questo creare un laboratorio Intel. I said the bottom-up approach, from startup, Intel Venture Capital, Intel Lab, through the experimentation labs. Questo è l'approccio che vorremmo seguire in Italia. Nessun altro? Young guys? Old guys? Old guys. Old guys. Una domanda. Io per ask something to Martin. Pensateci un momentino. Una domanda. Forza, dei ragazzi giovani, forza, prendi il microfono.
I want to know if there are any case in which the smart city system fail. At least, at social level, at economic level.
I can guarantee you there are. Yeah, the average success rate, again going back to Dublin's research, they say the average success rate of innovation is about 6%. So that's not very good. But one of the things we know is that and if I had more time, I could have shared this thinking with you, capability, research, maturity models, and innovation assessment instruments, that we can build innovation systems in companies, in cities, that dramatically improve the innovation results so that innovation becomes what we call the 3 Ps: more predictable, more probable, and more profitable. And in fact, in each of our own personal life, in fact, in my own life, I've always learned the most when I've made a mistake. And this comes back to something that, Piero and I have been writing about, which is the idea of experimental entrepreneurship, that it's all about prototyping very quickly, experimenting, putting out a prototype, testing, does it work? And very often the first prototype, it falls flat on its face, but you learn quickly. So I think the idea of experimental entrepreneurship and what we're doing with the City of Dublin, what we're doing with the City of London, the City of Barcelona, is experimenting in real time and involving the citizens. And immediately we try something, it doesn't work, but somebody comes up with a bright idea, well, what if we change this, or what if we change that? And we also don't have to be afraid of killing stuff. So if it's a bad idea, just stop it. I'm sorry to say at Intel, we're very good at making bad ideas work. And sometimes we do that where, we should start, when we immediately know it's a bad idea, stop. So yes, lots of failures. In fact, Rovio, Angry Birds, they had so many games that were flops until they came up with Angry Birds. But in the process of generating those games, they learned and they figured out, well, what's the secret sauce and what's going to make them a winner?
I have a curiosity that was driven by your last sentence, and you talk about experiential entrepreneurship. And do you have like a model at Intel that you use to do this kind of process inside, like to make innovation more profitable, predictable, and so on? And if like your venture fund evaluates better entrepreneurs that uses some kind of model?
Yeah, it's a good question. Intel's a very big company, but so there's lots of practices. But one of the things that we did 5 or 6 years ago was identify, well, what are the innovation pipelines in the company? What are the avenues for somebody who has an idea to bring it to the market? And we actually had 19 different innovation pipelines. So there was actually a big value add to actually visualize these innovation pipelines. So somebody could go to what we call Intelpedia, which is our internal version of Wikipedia, and they could figure out which is the best pipeline to submit their idea into. Now, 19 is too big. It's too many. So what we've been trying to do is simplify them. But one example of a process we use within Intel is called SIFT. It's called Systemic Innovation for Teams. And it's a 7-step process to get from just data to actually a working prototype with a business value model. And we'd be happy to share more details on that. But it's based on actually some of the D-School thinking at Stanford and IDEO, but also uses some of Edward de Bono's lateral thinking techniques. What we've been able to do is within a 2-day process, we're able to go from just observing data to actually creating this prototype with value. And one of the successes we had, we use this sometimes with our customers, we use this with Daimler about 5 years ago, and Enzo and I were talking yesterday about mobility as a service. And we did a 2-day workshop with the Daimler Business Innovation team. And after two days, out came the idea of actually Daimler setting up a service or mobility as a service. And today, Car2Go, I don't know if anybody has used the service, but it's a new business from Daimler where it's Daimler offering a rental service, and very often with electric vehicles. And it's starting to look like it'll be a big success. So yes, I think there are methodologies. And the Innovation Value Institute that I mentioned, there's an assessment instrument. So you can assess actually your organization, or you could actually, a country like Italy could assess actually the level of the innovation system. And I recently used this innovation assessment instrument with my own team, and I discovered a big blind spot because the area that the team rated us lowest on was innovation vision. And I thought we had a great vision. We're going to transform Europe, and Europe 2020. And the team agreed, yes, we have. But that's the innovation outcome, but what's the vision for the team itself? So we went to work on that, and another big US company used this tool. Now this company is very diverse. They build missiles, they build ships, they sell IT services to the government. And when they did the assessment, they also discovered a big blind spot because they found actually a very good innovation vision. They had very good innovation systems and processes, and so on. But their blind spot was their culture, because it was okay at this company to be risk-taking as long as you were spectacularly successful. And what they found is there was just a history of people that had taken risks, it had failed, and those people's careers were over. So once the company understood this, they start to actually think about, okay, how do we change our culture and actually reward a failure every day? So there definitely are processes, and we'd be happy to share more information on them. And I think the idea is that we can get innovation from where it's an art that's mastered by a few to a discipline that's practiced by many.
Related to your last answer and to the analysis of big data, you introduced citizens and social interaction as a source of innovation. And I simply found that most organizations and companies are not prepared to talk to the public. It's simply too much. Public have different sides, different opinions, even slightly, expressed in a different way. So how can you find something like best practice or good example to get open, really open, to get the best innovation from the social interactions?
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple of ways, and two examples. Dell, for example, so for many years now they have an innovation tool where customers suggest new features and indeed new products from Dell, and then the customers actually vote on what products, features they would like to have implemented. So that's one way of structuring that. But Apple, I think, I think is a very good example where they've created an innovation platform, and in the minute between you asking the question and me answering it, there's probably been 30,000 app downloads from Apple. So here's a process where indeed a significant part of the community is actually involved in innovating. But the process that we're using with the City of Dublin as well is we're inviting citizens and the business owners to work with us, and we set up structured workshops, and we come in with prototypes, and we ask, well, what do you think of this? And we make assessments, and the citizens who are interested and committed actually give some very good sort of feedback and suggestions. So I think there's a myriad of ways of doing it, but I do agree with you. Most companies are not in a position to actually do that. But I think companies will have to do that, or else they won't exist anymore, because there is a very big shift to actually meeting user needs and involving the user. So I agree with your observation, and yeah, I think it's urgent we all move and involve the customer and user a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we stop here, serve your lunch, and then you can come back home.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Grazie. Arrivederci.